Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. It is the football episode, and we are jam-packed in the off season. I feel like that was like a Josh Pate thing. I don't know why I said jam-packed like that. I apologize, all right? I know Josh Pate is not everybody's favorite subject out there. However, I know Zack likes him. So, Zack, that impression was for you.
I appreciate that. It's good. It's good.
I have a
I
little
think
more hair, I think, than I should have worn my ball cap if I was going to impersonate Josh Pate.
you got to talk
But
about meme. You got to talk about Meemaw a little bit more.
yeah. Hey, my Mima had quotes too, and honestly, they were kind of similar to Josh's. So anyway, we have some great guests with us. We have Max from the Sky U Pod. Max, Minnesota. How you doing tonight, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And Russ was abandoned tonight by his podcast. He was alone with no place to turn. Had his microphone. He was hugging it, I think, as he was texting me. And he just thought, I have no podcast to go to. Maybe JR has a spot. Russ, we've rescued you. How do you feel tonight?
I appreciate it. I mean, ever since I bought this nice new microphone, apparently my podcast is just can't get it together. We can't get everybody on the same page and record. But yeah, everybody's taking trips and out of town and got babies and all this stuff going on. So yeah, I'm last second edition here. I appreciate you having me on. Maybe Dylan will get in the comments. We can go back and forth a little bit again.
I was gonna say I put my kids to bed 7:30 sharp. All right, 7:30 sharp. Okay, and they're in bed. And then it's time for me to podcast. So there we go. There's Dylan. Russ. Russ, is it Dylan's fault why you're not podcasting tonight?
No, I'll give him that credit. It's rarely Dylan's fault that we're not.
Okay.
Although actually tonight it might have been because I think it was going to be me and him one-on-one, and then he said all his stuff's all over the place. And supposedly he had it all set up on a nice cart that he was showing off and bragging about. Last time we were on there with you and Kent for the I think during the Final Four, he was bragging about his portable setup. It can go anywhere, and now all of a sudden, it's not working. I guess I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we'll pray for Dylan. Dylan, I'm educating our future over here. We're proud of you, Dylan. We're proud of you. So, I am in a new setup tonight. If you notice, my face is super bright. This is not by design, but it's just trying to get used to some new things in my new house. So I apologize if my face looks a little bright. There's an easy way to just kind of hold your hand over the screen if you don't want to look at me. I understand that. But we do have some awesome stuff to talk about. All you should need to hear is our voices. We'll get to the first subject here, guys. College football, the NIL market for each position in the transfer portal. Now, this also does pertain to players being retained on their roster and not going to the transfer portal. They said that in the article. But John Talty, however you say that, he went out and talked to NIL collectives. He went out and talked to administrators and schools and tried to figure out what is a good range for most players in the transfer portal. He did say there were some exceptions, guys like Dylan Gabriel. I think there was another one, DJ Uyunglele, I think was another one that he mentioned. That was probably more than these ranges, but for the most part, the most players that are in the transfer portal, these are the ranges that you find. Zack, you tell me, man, are you agreeing with these or not? We'll get to that in a second. What position range here surprised you the most?
Honestly, I think wide receiver. And I can understand some of his logic. Like you play anywhere from 2 to 4 in most college teams in most of their pro sets. But I would imagine, I think it was Jeremiah Smith who it seemed like they were waiting to get the deal signed at Ohio State for his paperwork to go in. I have a sinking suspicion it was not $300,000. Maybe it was. I doubt it. And I
tend to agree.
Yeah, I think the high-level receivers are making quite a bit more, especially if you're pairing them with a high-level quarterback, who I also think is probably making more than $800,000.
Yeah, no, and that was my wonder as well. Is what are the ranges for recruits? Because in my thought, recruits might be making more money than transfer portal players sometimes, even though the transfer portal players are proven. you still get this idea of 5-star recruit and what they can be. And really that's what your program is kind of built off of is your recruits and how you're able to develop them. But Max, your thoughts on what position range here surprised you the most?
Yeah, I think the first thing that jumped out was maybe the DB market just being a little bit lower than I expected. I mean, you think, to your point, Zach, like a high-end wide receiver, if you have to defend these high-end wide receivers, you'd think you'd be paying those guys to defend them an equal amount to try to stop them. But I think just looking at it from you don't necessarily, you're not necessarily going to find all those top-end guys in the portal anyways, and they're kind of few and far between, whereas, if you can pick up one of the top offensive tackles, I mean, it's kind of like the NFL, comparing it to, the quarterback makes the most and the best guy protecting is going to make the next amount. But yeah, I think the only other thing that surprised me was just the range of the O-line market. You're telling me that the lower end offensive lineman is going to make more than a top end wide receiver or running back. I think that surprised me a little bit, but probably depends on, who all is available and what all is out there, what the market actually looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm an offensive lineman, even if I just had a terrible year, if I started like in the MAC, I'm going in the portal, right? There are some lower level Power 4 teams out there that might be sending you 350K. I mean, and at the end of the day, you're not going to get that if were in the MAC or something like that. But if you go to, I don't know, name your school, Boston College, Iowa State or something like that, you might be looking at, some kind of amount there. Russ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think maybe the wide receivers includes tight ends too. Is that a possibility? Because I don't see tight ends on there, so maybe that's why the low end is low.
I searched tight ends and I couldn't find anything on them. That was my thought, was maybe wide receivers included them too, but I couldn't find anything on them.
But yeah, I agree with Zach. The high end wide receivers have to be far above that top end of that range. But wide receivers are, usually you see a lot of college rosters that have 10, 12, 15 wide receivers listed. So I can see how those are kind of like, just take your shots, throw a bunch of darts at the board, and the guys that do well are going to move up, and the guys that don't, will maybe fill the position the next year. But an O-line similar. I think that's why the range is so tight. There is O-line is just about compiling size. You got to get bodies, and that's something we've talked about with Purdue a lot in this offseason is, we had so many different offensive line setups in single games, not just throughout the course of the season. Some programs can keep them healthy all year long, but, the college game has just gotten much more physical, especially in the trenches. And so you've got to, you got to be deep at O-line and you've got to stockpile those bodies. And I think that's why it's kind of more flat range there. But running backs, I would expect too, because it's, college is still a little bit old school. You still got to be able to run the football. People are excited about throwing the ball over the yard and playing basketball on grass, but I would expect the running back market to be a little bit higher than what that is. But everything else, kind of makes a little sense. You want your offensive line to probably be the second highest paid kind of group behind your quarterback group because you got to protect them to be able to do anything. But yeah, that's kind of what I see.
Zach, is it possible that some of these NIL collective leaders and these administrators, they talked to John Talty, however you say his last name here, and they were like, yeah, we pay them about this much. Of course, this is about what NIL is. And is it possible they were lying about it being so low? I mean, I would think they'd be lying about it being way higher, personally, because it's like, guys, you got to donate to this collective. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, dude, our collective is fine. What are you talking about? Like some of these topics, Caleb Downs only made $225,000 coming out of the portal to Ohio State. Like, I feel like if they were going to be lying and be inaccurate, they would be giving you a higher end, but these numbers just seem so low to me. How many quarterbacks have we heard that go for $1 million in the transfer portal and stuff like that? What do you think, Zach?
Well, I do think I think there's a bit of a cat and mouse game here, regardless whether it's higher or lower, and that's not just including this article. I think that's including when you hear about quarterbacks making millions of dollars. There's a reality that there's only a few programs that really can, if they wanted to offer everybody $1 million, like there's only a few programs that could do that. And so I think that like the Uber recruit, like the Uber talents, like they're certainly making more than the high end, right? Guys like Dylan Gabriel. I think it said in the article, back to Max's point, that high-end corners might double that range of, instead of 225, it might be 450. But you do have to realize a couple things. One, you still have to deal through a collective and not the school itself. And so it really does depend on how much money is being raised by the collective. And so depending on the school, Ohio State is going to have a much higher collective than, say, Northwestern, for instance. And so that's going to be, I think, a big thing. And then I think on top of that, there's just I was just doing the math quickly. If you went the high end for all your starters, you're talking about 10 mil. And I'm like, I think when you start to break it down, you realize, oh, that's individually, it's not, it doesn't seem like a lot, although all of us would probably love to make $800,000. But I think collectively it really starts to add up. And then you think your roster is like 85 to 100 players. Now, not all of them are making that high end, but so I wouldn't say that they're being completely truthful, but I don't, maybe this is my naivety or my naiveness, but I think it's probably closer to true than it is like really, really like a huge farce.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I think, one player that I think about pretty frequently, or not, I guess not frequently, but quite a bit with this market range here is somebody like Max Brosmer, who went to Minnesota, right, Max? I mean, this is somebody who was one of the best quarterbacks in FCS last year, and now he's coming to Minnesota. And, it's one thing to be one of the best quarterbacks in FBS, but to be one of the best in FCS, is this going to be somebody that gets paid the high 800,000, or are they going to get paid more? I don't know. Max, you guys just brought in a very high-profile quarterback in Max Brosmer. Do you feel like this quarterback market range that they've given here is accurate for what he is most likely making?
I mean, good for him if it is, but I feel like he's probably probably below what the market range shows, like you said, just because he is coming from FCS. And I think I would just knowing, how much PJ Fleck has talked about how much more money that our program's NIL collective needs to raise. I would be surprised if we then turn around and gave a huge chunk of that to a guy like Max Brosmer. But at the same time, I mean, that could just be PJ, playing the game of, oh, we need more. We don't have enough to keep, the blessed players that we have. So maybe he did fool us. I don't know. But yeah, if I had to bet, I would guess he's definitely below what this range lists, just because he's coming from a lower level and is pretty unproven at this point.
Well, no coach is going to tell everybody hey, we've met our NIL goal this year, right?
Right.
Great job, everybody. You can stop donating now. I would love to hear a coach come out and say that and see what the reaction would be. Russ, Dylan is still needing his NIL from BXP. So
he's buying horses. He's got plenty of money. He's good.
I was going to say, I know that you run the NIL for Boiler Express. So, make sure you get on that with him. But any final thoughts with this, Russ? I mean, we talked about the accuracy of Max Brosmer and just all these different things. Any more thoughts on if you think this is accurate or not?
Yeah, like Max just kind of touched on there. I think that this is getting much more kind of political. Like, these coaches are sound like politicians now. They only want to report what they want you to hear. They're all going to make it sound like they're poor and need more money. Like, everybody's, it's just a mind game now at this point. Like, I think it's very likely they could have underestimated what this range was. That way, when they bring a quarterback in, they can go, hey, Zack, look, this is the QB range, but we like you so much, we're going to pay you $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, this is the wide receiver range, but we're going to pay you 400. Look, see, this is the estimated, but I think that might have been the game that was getting played was, hey, let's undershoot it so that when we bring guys in, we just, hey, sign on the paper, sign here, don't take your other visits, just stay here. Like, you're good.
Yeah.
But you're going to have a lot of guys like Minnesota and Max was talking about there that, or maybe they're jumping up from FCS that you don't have to pay them that range because they're getting their shot. Like, they aren't somebody that was high profile that, transferred from a USC or Oklahoma. You're getting an FCS guy that has a shot. Like, yeah, you can definitely get a quarterback for 200,000, 300,000 probably from that stage. And then if they do well, then you're talking about having to raise NIL money to either keep them there or they're going to go take a bigger payday elsewhere.
Very true. Very true. So, Dylan's calling you out again, Russ. You do our financials. That's why you make zero. So, and also, Dylan, come back on Saturday. We'll have another one Saturday where we talk about NCAA and stuff like that. That's the national show. But for now, let's move on to walk-ons ending, and credit here to Trojan Fight. Now the NCAA trying to remove walk-ons because of abuse of NIL. That's exactly right. What we read in the article from Athlon Sports is that the NCAA is trying to figure out if they can get rid, well, I guess if they should get rid of walk-ons because of how teams are abusing NIL. We talked about it with the Michigan sanctions that could come, where we talked about, like, would it even mean anything if they gave them a scholarship reduction? Because Michigan's NIL could just say, we'll pay your school for you, right? So at the end of the day, like, just come on, be a walk-on, and we'll pay your school for you. And we know there are tons of other schools that are doing this, not because of reductions, but just in general with walk-ons. To me, this would be one of the worst possible things that could happen to college football. To me, this would absolutely solidify that college football is becoming the NFL. This would be worse than a playoff structure where it's the Big Ten versus the SEC. This would be worse than, contracts for players, all this kind of stuff. I mean, walk-ons ending, and for somebody like Matt Rule, his quote, if you're not watching on YouTube, his quote on SiriusXM, I think it was on that Danny Cannell show on SiriusXM, he was asked about it, and he says, I think it'd be awful. For every player that ends up with a high-end commercial, there are 100 players that are, becoming better people by having played college football and being part of a team. And he goes on to talk about how, a lot of these players go on to, run things in business and maybe be politicians and do great things, and many of them will credit their experience in college football for why they're able to do those things. I have a lot more thoughts on this, but Max, I'm going to kick it to you first. What's your reaction? What is your thoughts? The NCAA threatening to get rid of walk-ons in reaction to the possibility of teams paying the walk-ons way and not using scholarships.
Yeah, I think, they frame it up as like, well, teams are gonna, there's skirting the rules, and there's gonna be some, teams are doing some things kind of under the table and avoiding the scholarship numbers, and it's like, well, it all comes back to they just don't want to have to pay as many players with revenue sharing and all that. So it seems like, it's all about money, obviously, at the end of the day for the NCAA. And yeah, like I think Matt Rule's pretty much spot on. Like, how many guys at Rutgers are going to be doing this, or at a Northwestern, or at a Fresno State? Like, I don't see how this affects the mass majority of college football. And I think, if a couple teams are going to be doing this, or players want to do this, I don't know all the ins and outs about the rules around scholarships and the protections that it affords. Like, I know if you are on scholarship and you have to medically retire, you still have your scholarship available, and they can't take that away from you. So if you're going to, as a player, take on that risk and say, yeah, I'll skip a scholarship and just take NIL money, and you get hurt, can they pull that? I don't know. Like that, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and it seems like a lot of risk for the player. But if you assume the risk, then I don't know. I think it's up to the teams at that point.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yankee, I apologize. Oof, I was afraid Michigan sanctions wouldn't come up tonight. It's not about that. It's just a reference back to another episode. I apologize, Yankee. I wasn't trying to make it all about that. And then Philip, Braden Burlsworth, yes, Arkansas, the Arkansas player. I have a list of more guys I was going to name off, but I felt like I was talking a lot at the beginning. So if anybody else has a name that you want to list out there, feel free. But Russ, just your thoughts on this whole situation.
Yeah, Devin Mockabee, right? Our, running back star for Purdue. He's a walk-on. He wouldn't have happened if that was the case. But yeah, I'm in lockstep with you all on this. This is overregulation. This is the same thing that NCAA has been doing for a while now, that have people tired of the NCAA, and it's like they're trying to nail their own coffin shut. Like, it's, I get from a competitive standpoint, they're trying to overregulate and say, hey, we don't want these teams to be stacked. Especially you look at like those UCLA teams and with Wooden that had that dynasty. The reason they had that dynasty, part of it was because they went like 20 deep because there was no scholarship limit, and they just went. So they're trying to avoid that, but like this isn't the 60s and 70s anymore. Like everybody's on TV, everybody wants their shot. You can only see a team get so stacked before that player is going to go, hey, I want my shot elsewhere. So, I don't think there's any need for this whatsoever.
Zach, I think I know where you're going with this, and I think you have a catchphrase for it. So go ahead.
I'm just saying, Big Ten Huddle t-shirt, the NCAA stinks. That's it. It's done. Okay. In all seriousness, if the NCAA just did their job in the beginning, which is to actually regulate the sport, and this is going to your point, Russ, if they actually did their jobs when NIL and the transfer portal came to be, we are not having this discussion. But instead, they just do stupid things all the time and never actually do anything that benefits the teams, the programs, the players. And now we're in this mess where people can take advantage of this. And it's like, oh, you know what we should do? We should cut walk-ons. No, regulate the dang sport. Like, this is absurd. Like, I don't, how can people be so incompetent in their jobs and still have, well, they don't have influence. They're a laughing stock, and yet they can still make decisions that are going to impact the sport in a negative way. I'm tired of this sham organization basically running amok when they want to and then doing nothing when they need to. It's a joke. It's absolutely a travesty if this is what they do, and they should go the way of the dinosaur if that's what they do.
Well said, Zach. I'm gonna be honest. If this happens, I think this might be what sparks the Big Ten and the SEC saying, "Forget you, NCAA." And I think that the Big 12 and everybody else would go right along with them, and this is what would kill the NCAA. Now, I don't think they would do this because I think at the end of the day, they realize just how stupid it would be and just how much nobody would go along with it. I think you might have a year or two with no walk-ons because, things might have to get organized. Like if this happened tomorrow, we'd still play this season with the NCAA in charge and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like if they made this happen tomorrow, I fully expect the Big Ten and the SEC to say, hey guys, we're breaking off. If you guys want to come with us, come meet us in Indianapolis, right in front of the NCAA headquarters, and so that way we can, show them how much we hate them, and we'll talk about how we're going to leave them. I mean, Max, am I right here? Like, do you think if this happened, this is what would really spur the Big Ten and the SEC's removal of the NCAA in college football?
I mean, it'd be a pretty good reason, and it'd just be another, it'd be another example of like, well, what else are they going to do to just make another terrible decision in the future? Like, what, they're going to want to avoid other headaches like this. And yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I totally agree with you, Zach. Like, it's just, it doesn't help anything.
Russ, have you ever met a person who is mindless, stupid, and incompetent all at the same time? And if so, was their name NCAA?
Well, I don't want to. He's in the comments, and I don't want to hurt any feelings. So. No, no, it's kind of like Zach was, piggybacking off what I said. It's the NCAA doesn't want to stop it at the root; they want to treat the symptoms, right? And if you want to go down a rabbit hole, look at some of these committees that make these decisions. Like, look at the names on there. Go back to the College Football Playoff Committee last year, right? Like, look at how many people are on these committees that are not athletic minds, right? That are deans and chancellors and educators. I get it. It's student. It's they're student athletes. I get it. It's like these are schools. These are educational, places that are having sports on the side. But like, Painter was a part of the committee that discussed the one-time transfer rule when it first came up, right? There was like 14 people in the room, him and one other coach, and then 12 educators. Well, what happened when it came time to vote? They kick the coaches out, and then they vote on it. And then they wonder why this crap happens. Like, and then they want to, scramble around and treat a symptom and go, let's do this, let's do that. Like, no, like they're always wrong from the very source. They don't want to focus on what they're doing wrong at the source. They want to focus on when it gets out of hand, trying to put their fingers in the hole in the dam and try to stop everything. And it doesn't work. And it's going to eventually all collapse. But we're at Big Ten. This is Big Ten Huddle, so we'll be on the inside. We'll be the haves, not the have-nots when that happens.
Well, we're going to talk about how the Big Ten is the haves and the have-nots here in a second, and how much so the Big Ten and another conference in the SEC really could just say peace and forget you. So, Russ, I thought this was hilarious. At the beginning, Dylan said, "If you say me, help me."
I didn't say any names. I didn't say
you
any.
Son of a gun. Now send me the link. He's ready. He's ready.
I'm picturing on horseback riding to the podcast area, like he's
ready
to the podcast, pony.
Max, you're somebody from your podcast is having a good time tonight. You just described the state of Iowa, so there we go. Some good rivalry banter in there. Big Ten West rivalry banter. Zach, any final thoughts on this terrible subject before we move on?
I think Max and Russ tied it up with a bow. The NCAA stinks. Either progress or get out of the way.
Scott brought up this is a good point by Scott, and I apologize, Max. I'm like blocking you with these comments. I really need to find a different way to do this here. But I do remember this coming up, and I didn't know if I should bring it up or not. But since Scott brought it up, Kirby Smart at Georgia said he'd be totally fine with this. And one of the reasons why Kirby Smart would be totally fine with this is because if this happened, the teams that already run their teams like a pro team, i.e. Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, all these other teams that just pay all of their players so much money, which again, I'm an Ohio State fan saying this right here. Like, this would benefit them, but me as an Ohio State fan saying, I don't care if it would benefit my team. I care more about college football in this scenario, in the sanctity of what college football is, rather than, let's make it more like NFL, so that way Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, all these teams can do really well. Most of the SEC, really, they've been paying players for 20, 30 years. Anyway, but yeah, that's the whole premise there with guys like Kirby Smart, and it just, at a certain point, you start to care more about your program than you do about college football overall, which, don't get me wrong, I get that, but we have to remember what built our programs and, what they came from with how they are what they are today. A guy like Xavier Johnson, which, maybe nobody that's not an Ohio State fan knows who that guy is, but he was a walk-on for Ohio State that was playing. He was a wide receiver playing running back against Georgia 2 years ago in the playoffs, because Ohio State had all their running backs hurt. Because at the end of the day, you needed somebody who would say, "Yeah, coach, I'll go in there and be running back for you." And it was the walk-on wide receiver who was like your seventh string running back, who was then lining up in the backfield. Just absolutely crazy. So. Yeah, Scott, programs like Georgia can stack 4 and 5 stars, I guess, would have the advantage. They would. Programs like Nebraska rely on walk-ons and lower rated players who they can actually develop and bring them up to, maybe they aren't going to be first-round draft picks, but they're going to be really darn good college football players. There's a lot of programs like that out there with Nebraska. So, all right, let's move on to the next subject here. More money. All right, we just got talking about how much money is ruining college football. Let's talk a little bit about the money here. So the Big Ten in 2023, their revenue has been released now. And for the 5 out of the past 6 years, the Big Ten has made more revenue than the SEC. I have thoughts on this, but Russ, I'm curious yours more, like what your thoughts are. Do you think this is good for the Big Ten? Do you think this will continue for the Big Ten? What are your thoughts here, Russ?
Yeah, I think this is a example of how the Big Ten kind of got out ahead of some of this stuff by expanding their footprint, right? That was one of the big phrases they used when we added, the Rutgers and the Marylands and the Nebraskas of the world. That, it's not just about, what our best teams do, the Alabama and the Georgia or the Ohio State and the Michigan. Like, yes, that's important, But if you can add more markets, you're going to add a lot more share than if you try to add 5% to the Ohio State fan base or the Michigan fan base. You expand that footprint, which was one of the first and kind of got out in front of that, then that's what's going to happen. You're going to see what that chart looks like where Big Ten has done a much better job at that, I think, than the SEC. And now obviously these conferences are all kind of going that direction. So it'd be interesting to see what those other conferences look like tied into that. But I think that's what this is an example of, is how Big Ten, they just got out ahead of it. They expanded their footprint. They got to the East Coast. They got to the West Coast first now. And that's what happens.
Yeah, Brian makes a good point here. Bigger markets in the Big Ten footprint than the SEC footprint, and it's paying off for the Big Ten. They've gone out, and people kind of laughed when they added Rutgers and Maryland and those kind of places, but those are really good markets for the Big Ten. Maybe they not been the best teams.
It's a nice college town, but it's not New York or Chicago or LA.
Exactly. So when you bring in these bigger markets, and who have they added? Los Angeles, Seattle. Eugene's not the biggest market in the world, but I mean that's still the Oregon brand, the Nike brand, with Phil Knight and everything out there. So that's going to attract eyeballs. Zach, what are your thoughts here?
I think you were saying something pre-show that I thought was helpful, is that you look at the state of some of the Big Ten programs, and maybe they're starting to elevate pay for coaches more and more, but that wasn't a thing really until the last few years, to become more competitive with the SEC. And I think what's incredible about this is if you look at the competitiveness of the Big Ten and kind of the coaching compensation, it has not necessarily been on par with the SEC, maybe with the exception of the higher tier programs. Imagine now, you have an edge in the revenue. Only one national championship in the past 10 years. SEC has kind of owned it outside of Clemson. And they've been on the cutting edge of paying their coaches. Now, all of a sudden, Big Ten has better infrastructure, even with those disadvantages. Now they're going to start paying coaches more. Now you have more high-end programs, and you're getting better coaches, I think, in the lower tier programs, as we'll talk about in the hot seat rankings coming up. I think there is a real opportunity for the Big Ten to kind of take this and go to really go to 60, 70 miles an hour here and really start outpacing the SEC. The SEC does have the recruiting advantage, right? You can't simulate Florida and Ohio or Indiana. You just can't. You can't simulate their population, but I think
can't simulate their weather where they can practice and play year round too.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So there are still geographical disadvantages for part of the Big Ten in terms of that. But I think with everything else, the fact that they have this financial infrastructure from their media deals and everything else, I really do think it means that the Big Ten is well positioned. They're already beating the SEC in revenue, and now they're well positioned to go above and beyond that.
Yeah, I think the Big Ten just really needs to capitalize on this revenue. Some of my notes I had is I look at some of the rankings here recently in May. CBS put out their coaches rankings in this month, and this is their consensus rankings. And you can argue maybe this guy 1 or 2 spots here and there, but at the end of the day, the Big Ten has 3 coaches in their top 10: Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley, and Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning and Lincoln Riley are at 9 and 10. Ryan Day is at 2, I think. Yep, he was at 2. 2 of those coaches were just added this year. These were programs that were not getting paid the Big Ten money, and they won't be getting paid the Big Ten money until this year. And yet these are 2 programs that now are adding top 10 coaches to the Big Ten. 4 SEC coaches are in the top 10. Kalen DeBoer was just hired this year, his very first year in the conference. Steve Sarkisian was just added this year. So if you want to talk about the Lincoln Riley and Dan Lanning thing, you can talk about that there. Brian Kelly was hired, 2-3 years ago? He's in his 3rd year now, I believe. And then Kirby Smart's been there since 2016. So it's kind of a weird situation here. And then the facilities rankings, and then Max, I promise I'll let you speak on this here, but the facilities rankings, Ohio State, Nebraska, and Oregon are in the top 10. These were facility rankings that 24/7 put out. I forget the name of the author who put them out. I apologize, but in the top 10 for the SEC was Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, LSU, Auburn, and South Carolina. That's 6 for the SEC and 3 for the Big Ten. The next highest one for the Big Ten in the top 15 is Northwestern. And you go to the top 15, and the Big Ten has 4 teams in the top 15, and the SEC has 10 teams in the top 15. So we are working better on coaches and doing that kind of stuff here, but at the same time, there is an arms race, at least in facilities, which I know are not nearly as important as they once were with how players are able to make money now. NIL is kind of more of an important thing. But there is kind of an arms race here that the Big Ten is falling a bit behind, at least in the facilities. And if they don't start hiring better coaches, then they could start falling behind in the coaches as well. Max, what are your thoughts on the Big Ten, or if you have any thoughts on what I just talked about with the facilities and coaches?
Yeah, no, I honestly really don't have too much else to add from whatever, everything else you guys said is pretty much spot on, and I agree with. And yeah, I think the biggest thing that stands out is just the fact that the Big Ten now goes coast to coast, almost all 4 corners of the map. I mean, just having, the SEC, it feels like every fan base is kind of the same, right? Maybe outside of Texas, Oklahoma, adding them, but Big Ten now, I mean, you get your Penn State fans are a lot different than your Oregon fans, are a lot different than your USC fans. It just feels like having that, that collective. I don't like rooting for a conference, but you have so many more people, so many different fan bases now kind of rooting for the same thing that, I don't know, I think it's kind of cool that we can all kind of come together in that sense. Whereas the SEC, it's always been, the SEC, it just means more here. Like, I don't know. I think having all that diversity in fan bases and then just the history and all the different rivalries you're bringing in now is, I think, going to be a lot more entertaining and more fun to follow. If you're just a casual college football fan too, you have just so many more options to choose from. Whereas the SEC, is it Georgia or Alabama this year, or is it going to be Texas? It seems like it's going to be mostly the same teams, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I agree. And, at the end of the day, if Alabama, with who they are, if they do hire a brand new head coach, it should be somebody in the top 10, right? They should have the financial backing and the history to be able to do that. Interesting comment from Brian here, Zach. I want to get your thoughts. Some programs are just fine with complacency. They'll get their big payday, whether they upgrade their facilities or not. I think a piece of this is also, Zach, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, because I do think Brian makes a good point here, but I do think that a piece of this is that the Big Ten does have a lot of Olympic sports that they value very highly, and so they don't put as much money toward football as the SEC teams do because there are more sports that they try to evenly distribute this money out from. And so just because the Big Ten is making more money doesn't necessarily mean that Big Ten football is going to be producing more money than maybe SEC football. Would you agree or disagree with that, Zach?
I think that's one piece of it. I wonder, and this is just branching off that, JR, I wonder how much of it too is, when Urban Meyer came in 2012, it kind of felt like the Big Ten started to shift their philosophy in a lot of different ways. And I still think there's some of the roots of that. Like, you had the gentleman's agreement, like we're not going to recruit once they're committed, which obviously died. But I think even like the pace of upgrading facilities, I think the Big Ten has just always been a bit slower. We've always been the academic conference. We've always been the, like, we do it the right way conference. And now the right way is, the wild, wild west of NIL, and you have all this revenue. And so I think in some ways I could see certain programs like with what Brian's saying, but I think between the Olympic sports and also just the reality that the culture is very different, like has been different for decades, and how Big Ten programs think about their football program. And I think it's shifting, but I think sometimes it takes a long time to turn a cruise ship, in a sense. And I would say that's kind of what programs have to do.
I like the idea that the Big Ten is a cruise ship and the SEC is like just a bunch of canoes or something like that. I like that thought there, Zach. Russ, your final thoughts here, and then we'll move on to the hot seat rankings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot more to add other than, one thing I was thinking of is, the Big Ten, as much as I talked about these committees have to have more coaches and former players on them, the Big Ten has looked at this as more of a business. Yeah, it's nice to win national championships, but, from a revenue and money-making standpoint, having national championships and having guys in the NFL that can donate $500,000, $1 million, that's nice, and the SEC's got that, but getting a $800 million TV deal is a lot easier than getting, 150 guys in the NFL that are going to donate 500, it's the better battle is to get that big chunk of change from the media side of things and then put in the programs. And, I think that Big Ten programs have started to shift. Purdue is one of them that, in the last 5-6 years, they've started to put more money into the football program, and you've seen it start to kind of pay off for us through the Jeff Brom era and what Matt Painter's continued to do. And I think that the Big Ten, you'll see that shift, like Zach was saying, you'll start to see that turn. It won't be overnight, but these schools will start putting more of that money into the programs that make the school money to just get that snowball continued going.
Yeah, and I think that the SEC has realized that for a long time, and like the Big Ten, they just like I know at least in Ohio State's case, I don't want to accuse every single school out there, but like in Ohio State's case, like they've had the same football facilities for years, and in the meantime, they've built like women's softball facilities, and name your other program here, athletic program here that they've built facilities for, which is hard because I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like I want these other athletic programs in the college to have good facilities as well. But like you said, Russ, there is one sport that makes the most money for all of the programs, and in the Big Ten, it doesn't seem like that sport is valued nearly as much as it is in the SEC. And so the Big Ten can make all the money they want, but if they're not going to value their football programs the same way that the SEC values their football programs, it's not going to matter. Which some people might say is the right thing, that the schools should value them. The football programs should not be valued so highly. I would tend to disagree, but that's just me. So, all right, let's move on to our final subject here. All right, Big Ten football coaches hot seat power rankings. So I had this idea. I saw a lot of people talking about hot seat rankings, and so I went to a website and tried to figure out, who was on the hottest seat in the Big Ten, and I just felt like the rankings were completely awful. They had PJ Fleck at number 2. They had Deshaun Foster at number 17. I mean, like some of these rankings, I was like, okay, I just completely disagree with this, so I'm just going to make my own. Instead of commenting and telling them they're stupid, I'm just going to make my own. So I'm trying to mature, guys. I'm trying to do a better job of interacting with people online and not calling them stupid or morons.
There's only one entity you can call stupid.
Yes.
The NCAA.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
There we go.
Take that, Charlie Baker. Is it Baker or Barker?
I don't even know at this point.
Yeah. Charlie's stupid. That's his name. So anyway, Ryan Day is at number 1. And I say in the article that I wrote that I don't necessarily think he's on the hot seat, but I do think that if there's anybody this season that if he doesn't accomplish A, B, C, and D, I do think he's gone. I think Lincoln Riley is close, but I wouldn't even say Lincoln Riley is on the hot seat. I would say Lincoln Riley had a disappointing season last year, and he needs to do better than he did last year, and he needs to show that he's more than just a quarterback developer. But at the end of the day, like if he comes out and Miller Moss wins the Heisman and the team goes 10-2 or 9-3, like I mean, if they have a season similar to LSU last year, I don't think USC fans are going to be mad. So these were really, really difficult rankings to put together. Max, I would love to know your thoughts on PJ Fleck and just the rankings overall.
Yeah, I think PJ's at 12 mostly just because of his buyout stipulation that the University of Minnesota really can't afford to get rid of him at this point. So yeah, if money was no object, I think he would be higher just because just hasn't, the fan base probably would in general agree that the performance just hasn't been what it's needed to be.
He had a good year in 2022, but like I think that would most Minnesota fans would say that was the best one, and we've really not seen anything like it, right?
Right. And well, even like I feel like the best year was 2019, and I feel like that still gets
Or maybe
referenced.
I'm thinking
It's like that's
2019.
5 years ago, and it's like I don't know. I feel like in his one out, I think is maybe the last. Coming into this year, he's kind of got the out of like, well, we have to. There's turnover at quarterback, new defensive coordinator, all the changes in the Big Ten landscape. Like he's kind of got some outs right now to at least give him an extra year of leniency, but. Yeah, I personally would probably put him at least in the top 8 if I were to, I'm not paying his buyout, so I don't care.
Yeah, if money was no object, he'd be in the top 8.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you can say that with a couple of guys on here as well. Russ, one guy who is in the top 8, Ryan Walters. I tell you, I have thoughts, but I'm going to let you speak first.
I thought you were a fan of Ryan Walters, man. Now you
I
put
am
him
a
in the
fan of
top
Ryan
8.
Walters.
I guess you're ready to see him gone already. But no, I think this is a product of, it's a new Big Ten this year, right? Like obviously we're adding the 4 schools, which is the big storyline. But 9 of the 18 coaches, I think, are first or second year coaches. And so I don't think you see them get booted unless they're, absolutely terrible compared to what their expectations are. But there's really, you go Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley. I would probably have Brett Bielema third, but not because I think he's gone this year necessarily, but there's just not many guys I think that can do such a bad job they could get booted this year. There'd have to be off-season drama, which we had some with some coaches last year in the Big Ten, so that could happen. But as far as on-field performance, there's a narrative you can write for almost every one of these teams. If they have a bad season, well, this is why, and we need to see more next year. We don't need to boot them because of that. There's many narratives that can be written for a bad performance, and because of that, it doesn't put many of these guys truly on a hot seat.
Yeah, I totally agree. Brian Myers made a good comment here. He said, not hate seat. I guess hate seat too, but hot seat is a relative term. Day is fine as long as he beats Michigan. He's good. And like, that was my reasoning for putting him number 1. I don't see a single other guy on this list that his entire job comes down to one game this year other than Ryan Day. And so like, yeah, Lincoln Riley might be in a little bit more trouble. James Franklin might be in a little bit more trouble. I can't tell you if they were or not to administration, but at least to the fans, like not many guys' entire job comes down to what seems like one game. And if Ryan Day doesn't win that one game, he doesn't win the Big Ten, and he doesn't win the national championship, what's crazy is he couldn't not win the Big Ten, not beat Michigan, but still win the national championship, which is just crazy. I don't
What
think
if
you
he
can fire
loses
a guy
that game 3 times, though, as could happen with this format?
which fire him after the second one. Brian Hartline in charge. I don't know. But it's just wild to me, Zach. You obviously follow Ohio State very closely as well. Do you agree that Ryan Day should be number 1 on these rankings?
Well, so I'm going to answer this in my typical, I have many thoughts on this. I think what's hard about this whole list, and I'm sure you felt this in making it, JR, is like there's no Scott Frost.
Yeah.
And what I mean is like, if he doesn't prove something in the first 3 games, he's gone.
Yeah.
I think there are Paul Christs on this list, but I think Max and Russ, you make good points that the buyouts are probably too high. And like, so I think Kirk Ferentz is actually a really good example. Like Iowa is never getting rid of Kirk Ferentz. Like it took them forever to get rid of Brian Ferentz, right? They're not getting rid of Kirk Ferentz. But like, I could see why they would to refresh the program. But like, I just don't think that's where a lot of programs are. Right. And I think Max, you brought up PJ Fleck, the buyout was really high with them. So that brings me to, I think Ryan Day, there's a storyline, a narrative that gets him fired. But my guess is even if that narrative comes true, it would take I think in my opinion, it would take a loss to Michigan and maybe even 7-5 or 8-4 with a loaded roster, or 9 if you miss the playoff and you lose to Michigan. So 9-3 and losing to Michigan.
I said in the article, if they lose to Oregon and Michigan, don't
you
make
think
the
they're done?
playoffs. I think he's done.
You don't even if he makes the playoff.
No, if he misses the playoff, does
Well,
not
yeah.
win the Big Ten, and
Yeah.
loses both of those games, I think he's done.
Yeah, I
Which
think
is absolutely crazy because some people are ranking him
Yeah.
the best coach in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
He's also number one on the hot seat too. Just absolutely insane.
Yeah, but even then, like I think there's a world where you lose to Oregon and Michigan and still make the playoff, and like very possibly make a run in the playoff, and he's fine. Lincoln Riley, yeah, and by fine, everybody in Columbus will hate him, but he'll be fine.
But the administration won't fire him.
Yeah. I think Lincoln Riley, there's a narrative. There's a narrative for sure that he could get fired. James Franklin, I think Penn State fans feel very stale, like that he's very stale. The one I'll say two, and Russ, you were onto something I think with Bielema, but I think Deshaun Foster and Brett Bielema, I think, could get the axe sooner. One, because I think Deshaun Foster, in some ways, he's a UCLA guy, but he was also, in a sense, a desperation hire. I know they have a lot of faith in him. But if they go like 2-10 and they're like, we could get someone better and we have time to make that decision, I think they could eject. And I think Brett Bielema, if they have another bad season, like 3-9, 4-8 type of bad season. Yankee and Brian, I think, bring up a good point though. And this is with Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley, and maybe I'll throw it to you guys. Do you fire Ryan Day, even if he misses the playoff? Do you fire him? Who do you get? Like, who do you replace him with?
Like, that's the question, right? Like, that at the end of the day is a logical thing to think of. I can tell you right now, Ohio State fans, like Yankee just pointed out right here, he says, guys, let me do you this favor right now. Please dispel yourselves any fear that Ohio State is losing at home to a Michigan team, down 90% of their offense, their coach, and most of their staff. I'm just telling you right now, all of that plays into the emotions of Ohio State fans because Michigan has lost so many players. They have lost their staff, and it's going to be at home. And Ohio State has the loaded roster that they have. Yes, Brian Myers and Yankee make very good points, and Sky U Pod make very good points here. Like, who else do you hire? That's for the administration to think about. Ohio State fans will not think about that. Ohio State fans will say, you lost 4 years in a row. We don't care if there was some kind of cheating going on, allegedly, whatever. Like, we don't care if that was happening. You still lost, and at the end of the day, like, it's yeah.
You're on to another shirt idea, JR. Ohio State fans will not think. That could be what we wear after. If they
are not rational. I am one of them. I understand.
Especially when we lose to Michigan.
Tony's asking here, is number 1 the hottest or number 18? Number 1 is the hottest in these rankings. I know that's kind of hard to see there. I was thinking of doing like a fire meter or something like that, but I didn't have room for it. So Max, another guy to think about here. Russ, I'm going to ask you about Deshaun Foster here in a second, but Max, I know you know a thing or two about the Wisconsin program. Is Luke Fickell at 4 here accurate? What do you think?
Compared to everyone else, I think it's fair. I mean, like you said earlier, like you could probably shuffle around 4 through 8, I guess, and it could really make sense. Or you can make a fair argument. I think Wisconsin fans, Luke Fickell came in as one of these top coaching candidates. He was supposed to change Wisconsin into this new high flying offense and get all these top recruits and get all this talent coming in. And it's kind of been flat, and there's been no signs of improvement. Tanner Mordecai last year coming in. Now he's got Tyler Van Dyke coming in. There's a lot of turnover at the quarterback position. Mm-hmm. The defense, I mean, Wisconsin's always been known for their defense, and even that struggled. So it's like, I feel like he's lost a lot of that Wisconsin identity. So from the fan standpoint, I'm sure they're thinking he's maybe even higher. but I guess we'll see how it goes this year.
Yeah. Another thought here from Brian: is Lanning overhyped? What has he done exactly? Here's my answer for Lanning. And Russ, if you want to comment on this, or Deshaun Foster, I'll open it up to either one for you. But my thing with Lanning is he just lost to Washington twice last year, didn't win his conference, and you still have Oregon fans in every single YouTube video, every single podcast, every single rankings on Twitter being like, Dan Lanning should be number 2, number 3 in the nation. He's the second best. He's the third best coach in the nation. And it's like, he just lost to Kalen DeBoer twice last year, your hated rival. Meanwhile, Ryan Day, if he lost to Michigan twice in 1 year, I mean, they'd be burning him at the stake. So I'm not saying anything here about like Oregon and Ohio State fans. I think that both are kind of delusional in their own little way. But like, if I'm looking at the way Oregon fans are reacting and the way the NIL is going for Oregon right now, honestly, Dan Lanning could go 0-12 this year, and I think he'd be fine. I don't think he's getting fired if he goes 0-12 this year. I mean, because I think they would look at it and they would be like, oh, yep, it was Dylan Gabriel's fault. We'll bring in Dante Moore and we'll be fine. I don't know. Like, they'll blame somebody else, it seems like.
Yeah,
I
if you
thought
have
that's an example right there that Ohio State fans are not rational, right? Because Dan Lanning's basically the West Coast version of Ryan Day, right? Like, very successful, great national, record and ranking, but lost their rival twice in 1 year. But he's 18th on this list, while Ryan Day is first.
Exactly. Nobody's rational. We're all crazy. Zack.
I did make one discovery. I kind of hinted at it in the chat, but I wanted to throw it in here first. So Tom Allen, right? IU's not exactly a football power. You would think that they'd just be happy if they could win a couple of games and get 10,000 people in the stands. But they fired Tom Allen last year. What his buyout was? Any chance?
Wasn't it like $12 million, or like it was like one of the third highest buyouts in college football, wasn't it?
So it was actually $20.8 million, but they negotiated it down to about 15.5. So I think we also got to readjust. Like, I kind of changed my mind mid, while Zack was going there. I kind of looked that up and kind of changed my mind on that. That I don't think buyouts mean a whole lot when you're getting 70, 80, however many million a year just from TV revenue. A $10 million buyout is nothing if you want to go win in college football and you think you got a coach that can get you somewhere better than what your current guy is. I don't think maybe these guys are as safe as what we think they are.
Yeah, no, I agree. Zack, Drufus here brings up somebody else in the rankings who's smack dab in the middle. He says, how can Smash? I feel like I need to do like some kind of motion every time if they're going to start calling him Smash. I don't know. Smash, I assume he means Sharon Moore. Where he is, he just got there. I'll give my reasoning, and then Zack, you give me your thoughts. So I wrote in the article that I do think that there is some expectations for Sharon Moore, but at the end of the day, when you look at the guys who were ahead of him, they just got there and they came away from terrible situations where I feel like if Jonathan Smith went 3-9, or if Kirk Cignetti went 3-9 this year, or Jed Fish, if he went 3-9 this year, they would almost like have an out and people wouldn't be too upset about it. If Sharon Moore went 3-9 this year, I'm not saying that Michigan fans would be like ready to burn him at the stake, but I do think that Michigan fans would be saying like, okay, this guy's never been a head coach before. He was a great offensive coordinator for us, and he was definitely a part of that national championship. But did maybe we, put him up too soon? Because that was kind of like my thought process for a lot of these guys. If somebody goes 3-9, what is the thought going to be next year? Because like I said, really the only guy who's in danger of being fired at the end of the year is most likely Ryan Day, maybe Lincoln Riley, but really Ryan Day seems to be the most one that's a concern there. Zack, would you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
I'll there's one other thought I had with outside of Sharon Moore, but I think Sharon Moore has done no favors with who he has to follow and with the current expectations. Because I think the national media, like we just saw, I think it was Joel Klatt's top 25. He had Michigan 8th. And regardless of what actually happens, like if you like, I would not be surprised if in the AP, they're in the AP top 10, AP top 15 at the start of the year. And regardless of how dumb preseason polls are, like people use that as a metric. And then you're following a really great head coach that won a won Michigan's first national championship in 26 years. And, you know, if you go 6-6 your first year, that really puts you in a bad way. And I'm not saying they'll go 6-6, but like that really
their
puts
win
you in a
total's at
bad way.
9.5. I mean,
Yeah.
the
So
Michigan win total. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if they go 7-5, 8-4, even then, like you're like, is this what we're signing up for? That can really put a sour taste in your mouth. And so like I think this year he's fine. Like I think he gets a mulligan year regardless, unless if it just goes completely off the rails, or it's found out that he was complicit in something and is, you know, that's a whole nother podcast. The other one, I am not a Loxley guy, and I can see the appeal because of his recruiting, but I feel like he does less with more all the time. And maybe that's just my own personal perception, but I'm like the loss to Northwestern last year, I felt like feels like sums up for me how I feel about Loxley is like, I feel like we talk about you beating the big three of Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State every year, and instead you lose to Northwestern. Why are you still employed?
It happens.
Get bodied.
Yeah. So my thing with Mike Loxley was, number one, Maryland fans don't care about football. He could go 3-9 there, and Maryland fans would say, "When does basketball season start?"
You could say that about IU and or Indiana, and they just got rid of their coach. So
yeah, maybe. But the other piece there is that since 2019, every full season, so excluding 2020, every full season, Mike Loxley has either improved the record or kept the record the same. And so when I first started this list, I had Mike Loxley up at like 4. And I thought, okay, this guy, you know, he is doing less with more. And then I looked at this and I was like, oh, but he's like, he hasn't had a year where he finished worse than the year prior. So like he's raising it until he goes 3-9 or 4-8 or misses a bowl. I don't really know if I can put him anywhere near the top 5. I felt like I was kind of down on him at 8 because of how much Maryland fans don't care about football. And at the end of the day, he's been improving. So, I mean, and that's the whole thing with Ryan Day. Ryan Day is the number 1 coach in the conference, and Ohio State fans care so much about beating one team on their schedule that if he doesn't beat them this year, he's gone, right? Like, I mean, obviously other things have to happen. We talked about that, but I just the truth is none of these coaches are most likely going to be fired this year. Ryan Day is probably the one that's most at risk, and all of them have a different story. Kirk Ferentz is never going to be fired by Iowa. Yeah. He will be told to leave so he can retire, but he's never going to be fired. They are never going to tell him, Kirk Ferentz, you need to, you know, we're kicking you out right now. They'll do that to his son, but like they would ask him to resign before they actually fire him.
Yeah. If I can just, because I see a lot of people in the comments being like, how did you come up with this list, JR? Because this has kind of been your brainchild. I think it's important to remember that this is a contextualized conversation. So like, it's not just like it really matters where you coach. It matters the administration. It matters the story. And like all those things matter. And so I think to your point, like Ryan Day being number 1, I think a lot of people are looking at this list and like, how do you have Ryan Day one? But we're saying who is in the most danger? And the reality is a lot of these coaches really aren't in danger, but there are pathways where they will be in danger.
Yeah.
And the big, like, I do appreciate what you're saying about Ryan Day in particular, is that there is one Saturday in November that will make that seat a lot hotter if he loses. And I don't think you can't say that about any other coach on this list.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's nobody else on this list that one Saturday is going to define, you know, their coaching job. Sorry, Russ, go ahead.
I was saying, and then one Saturday in December again, and then one Saturday in January, and then at that point, then it's full on inferno in Columbus. Yeah.
That's accurate.
If we're taking shots here, I'll take a shot too, like Zach did there. My Mike Loxley is Matt Rule. You know, I don't understand the hype. I don't understand the grace that's been given to him on the heels of losing 4 straight winnable games and missing a bowl game. I get that it was year one, but I mean, if you're an NFL fan, the Panthers experiment was not great. Wasn't great. And he had really one good year at Baylor and bolted for the NFL. And yeah, he did a great thing at Temple, but that's Temple. That's not the Big Ten. That's not the SEC. So, I think that the fan base could really turn on him fast if it doesn't go the way they want it to. Because, 5-7, and you were happy at 5-3 at that point. You thought, hey, he's really doing something great here. Can't wait to see what he does. But, Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech, Illinois, Northwestern, my Purdue team, like that was your wins. Like it wasn't like you went and you really beat somebody when you had to beat somebody to win one game to go to bowl game. You couldn't get it done. So, I think that, he's got the talent. He's got the people that coming in that everybody's excited about. If he doesn't do, more with that, he's going to be that Loxley doing less with more instead of more with less.
Mm.
And I don't disagree with you, Russ. I think there are a few factors with Nebraska why I had Matt Rule a little bit lower than maybe you and some other people think. I think getting Dylan Raiola was huge for the fan base and their excitement for him. And I also think his past with Temple and Baylor offers a lot of hope for the future and what can happen. Like, even if Matt Rule goes 5-7 again this year, I feel like the Nebraska fan base is going to be like, do we really want to fire another coach? Like, let's just give him time. He brought in Dylan Raiola. He has Tony White. Like, let's just give him some time. Now, if Tony White moves on, maybe a different story. But, yeah.
I've also heard a lot of Nebraska
I'm
fans.
not necessarily disagreeing with you, Russ. I'm just looking at the fan base and saying, I don't think they think the same way we do.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of them that don't want another Scott Frost either, though.
That's true.
They gave Scott Frost a lot of leash, thinking it was going to turn around, and it ended up just being a really, really painful era for them.
Yep,
that's true. That's true.
They will turn on him if it's another 3-9 season with 8 one-score losses. That
Accurate.
I don't think their hearts can take that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
accurate.
Like, I think if I were a Nebraska fan, I don't know what I'd do with that.
I'm going to go through a few comments really fast, and then we'll get out of here, guys. Sonny, friend of the show, JR comes up with graphics where you could put Ohio State or something to do with Ohio State #1. This is 2 weeks in a row now. Yes, Sonny, you are correct. Last week I had Ohio State #1 and the best teams to never win the Big Ten, and now I have Ryan Tatum. I was actually going to reference that Sonny here and say, see, Sonny, I'm not biased, but Sonny has found a loophole to say that. So Young Bucket says Brett Bielema needs to be higher. He has the highest chance of getting fired, needs to make a bowl at least. I think Illinois fans love Brett Bielema. I think 2 years ago they loved it, and I think that last year they have a little bit of excuse, and I think they're high on him. Maybe I'll be proved wrong at the middle of the year if it doesn't look like he's going to a bowl, but everything I hear from Illinois fans, they seem to be happy with him. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but let's see. Yankee Lincoln, better hope it's 70 and sunny November 2nd in the big house. Thankfully for Lincoln, I don't think his entire coaching career is depending on that one game. He's got a few other games, LSU, Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame, that might be a bit more dependent there. But in casual Big Ten, hot seat rankings, 1, any seat Russ is sitting on because he spits fire every time he speaks.
Boom.
There you go. You got
That's
Dylan
why
the
we're
hater and Kent the hyper up there for you, Russ.
That's why the Boiler Express is having trouble recording right now. I guess they're afraid of my fire.
There you
That's
go.
what it is.
There you go. Totally right. All right. I think that's all the comments I was going to get to. There's a lot of comments in here. Comments really started getting going during the segment here. So thank you, everybody, for listening and offering your comments here in the power rankings. I realize this is a very tough list to put together, and there were a lot of different opinions about it. And that's why I like to do stuff like this, because I think there are a lot of different subjective opinions you can go after, and I appreciate hearing from everybody. Max, why don't you tell us where we can find the Ski U Pod at?
Yes, you can follow us on Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it now. It's SkyUPod1. We're on YouTube now at SkyUPod, and then you can find all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or I think we're on pretty much every platform you can listen on. So yeah, check us out.
Are you guys one time a week right now in the off season?
We've been trying to do every other week for the off season, and then once we get closer in, we'll probably do every week.
Gotcha. It sounded like you were going to say Tinder instead of Twitter there at the beginning. Find us on Tinder.
That's
I don't
funny.
think SKU Pod will be there if you're on Tinder. There are other purposes there. So, Russ, can you find the Boiler Express Pod on Tinder?
Maybe Dylan. I know Dylan's. He's. I won't get into that. We won't get into that. No. You can find Boulder Express anywhere you listen to your media, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you want to come at me personally, I'm at BXB_Russ. If my fire was too much for y'all, you can hit me up there.
I love it. Zach, Big Ten football talk. Where can people find it? What are you doing over there?
Yeah, so Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and it's been exciting. I actually have been doing this spring state of each Big Ten program. So I actually just had Kurt from SkyU Pod on that episode's dropping next Monday, and then Russ and I are going to be talking about the state of Purdue in a couple weeks as well. But we've been dropping episodes every Monday morning. It's not live stream; it's just recorded, and then we go. But yeah, it's been fun. Getting more involved in the YouTube side of things. So that's been really fun. So definitely check us out. And you can email me at bigtenfootballtalk@gmail.com or follow us on X.
Dylan's upset with you. Don't even shout out the podcast socials.
I'm sorry.
Selfish.
Dylan works hard over there at Boiler_Express on Twitter and Instagram. Go check out our graphics guy over there.
There we go. Dylan made it through the whole episode. Most times he's not commenting at the end of the episode, so it must be something about Russ bringing him. And it's a football episode too. Dylan's normally
he's
in
the
here
true
much
old.
more.
He falls asleep, so he's the true old. That's probably what happens.
Yeah.
So.
There you go. Yankee, love the show. Thank you, Yankee. We appreciate you being here every single
Appreciate
night.
you, Yankee.
Appreciate all of you. Do come back next Tuesday for more Big Ten football talk. That's not the name of this podcast.
Yes, come back for Big Ten football talk.
For the Big Ten Huddle, Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow night, we will have basketball talk at 9 o'clock again, Eastern time. So come check us out. We appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.